Thank you all for joining us today. I'm tasked with quite a big challenge, and that is to share with you some information about analytics in a 30-minute window. Obviously, I think myself, Roger, and Marcia, who's going to be up on stage with me, could all probably talk for days on the topic. So I wanted to kick this off and get some introductions in place. So as William said, my name is Kevin Eichelberger. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Blue Acorn. I've started that company in 2008. I'm a very passionate advocate for making data-informed or data-driven decisions, however you use the phrase. And I'm a technologist at heart. I say I'm a recovering developer, so I fortunately don't have to dive into that very often anymore. Presented at lots of industry conferences and events, most recently at Imagine last year. So Blue Acorn, we are a Magento Gold service provider. We've been a Magento partner since probably the very, very early days of Magento, back in version 1.0. Amazing to see how many new people are here today. After being here for probably since the first Imagine, usually it's the same suspects in the room. So great to see all the new people. Our mission as an organization is to provide superior e-commerce results through data-driven solutions. We got 100 employees in Charleston, South Carolina, focused very much on the sciences behind e-commerce. So lots of use on data. So obviously, web analytics, we're a Google Analytics certified partner. We're also partners with Optimizely and Monetate, use a lot of A/B testing and analytics in our services delivery. Enough about me. I'm going to switch it over to Marcia, who's going to be joining us up on stage, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcia Jung. I'm a product manager on the Google Analytics team, responsible for e-commerce analytics. Just last year, if we go to the next slide, we launched Enhanced E-commerce, which is a complete revamp of our e-commerce analytics capabilities. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, some of the key benefits of Enhanced E-commerce is that it provides very deep insights into user shopping behavior. So you're now able to see information about users who complete product detail views, add to cart, checkout starts, and of course, purchases. Another key benefit of Enhanced E-commerce is also the ability to get very granular product performance analysis so that you're able to see which products are most frequently viewed, which ones are most frequently added or even abandoned in cart, and of course, which ones are ultimately purchased. We're also able to do on-site promotion and merchandising analysis. And of course, we also integrate with Google Media so that you can very quickly create user lists and then share them with your, let's say, Google display network so that you can retarget users on Google Media. And just a quick plug here, Kevin's team's actually gone ahead and developed an extension for Enhanced E-commerce support, and that's available today on Magento Connect. So we really encourage you to go ahead and take a look at that. And thanks. Happy to be here.
Also joining us on stage is Roger Willcocks.
Thank you, Kevin. So I apologize for my accent. I'm from across the pond. My background, I learned to speak like that at Cambridge University. It's just me. And I've been involved with the internet for quite a long time now. I think my first project was putting a credit card online, application and servicing, with great big IBM mainframe integration. That was back in 1996. And specialized in e-commerce since 2002. So over that time, I've worked with about probably best part of 500 retailers, helping them build their businesses on the internet. Unlike Marcia, I'm not a deep technician. I'm much more focused on the business and marketing aspects of using analytics. So I'll be sort of operating at that level. My company, Screen Pages, we're a Magento Gold partner. We've been using Magento now for 6 years. We used to use Microsoft Commerce Server. We switched over because we like the guys here. It's been very successful for us. We build bespoke websites for our clients, a lot of customization, a lot of integration. And we spend a lot. They're not the biggest retailers in the world. There's some statistics about their size. They tend to be small to medium size. So my interest really is to provide them with a sort of sensible business-led service that's appropriate to their size and needs. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Roger. All right, so if talking about analytics in a 30-minute window wasn't challenging enough, our next biggest challenge is to address the needs of different levels of sophistication. So I'm going to ask you in the audience for a quick poll real quick so we can assess the different levels of where your organization operates so we can try to tailor the content to the audience. So by show of hands, how many of you in attendance use analytics with a level of frequency of, let's say, greater than once a week, but that data might be refrained to only a small group of people or just an individual? By show of hands, how many people are in this scenario? That's about 25% maybe. How many of you use web analytics to report on your performance up to management, and those are used as KPIs for your success in your role or whoever's in charge of the e-commerce business? All right. And how many of you would say your organization prioritizes and budgets based on web analytics data? It's getting slimmer, but still about 15% maybe. And how many of you work in organizations that are sophisticated in their use of web analytics data, where that information is used and leveraged by the C-level executives in your organization to make business decisions that pertain to the website and beyond the website? Great. Got some advanced users in here. Perfect. All right. So the format of this panel, and it's really more of a conversation, is to present different use cases to our panelists and have them address and answer how they might react or act in those specific scenarios. Trying to cover a broad base of things here from, I'll say, basic to more advanced. But hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. Again, it's a very short window of 30 minutes, so I'm only going to ask a few questions. Hopefully give you all the opportunity to ask some questions yourself. If not, feel free to email us or tweet us or ask us after the session, and we'll be available. Can we go back a slide? This thing is, I'm going to turn it upside down. So we'll have the opportunity for some questions at the end. But to get things kicked off, there was a number of people in the audience that I saw that either didn't raise their hand at all or raised their hand in the first category but not the second. So it's clear from the polling that many of you are in organizations that I would consider at a crawl state in terms of the use of analytics. And so the first use case I'm going to present to Roger, and the use case is, let's say I work in an organization that is very small, we have limited resources, we don't necessarily have the knowledge or expertise on analytics. How do I take the next step? How do I move that forward and start that process of embedding analytics into the organization?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. So generally, I think the starting point for all usage of analytics is what business problem are you trying to solve. It's very easy to get sucked into the massive amount of data that's provided in analytics. So figure out what's important to you, what are you trying to, and then once you know that, you can then establish what you want to measure. And in analytics terms, that will distill down to maybe 5 to 10, 15 metrics, something like that, that are legitimate, and it can become important planning tools as your online business increases. So that's the first thing I would do. So I wouldn't mess around with analytics till you're clear about what you want to look at. Once you've done that, it's to figure out where those metrics can be found in analytics, which is quite easy. There's massive amount of material on Google's website, on the internet in general, about how to figure these things out. And then the best thing to do, I think, is to set up what's called a dashboard. So you just build the report, put it into a dashboard, and then you can then share it with anybody else in your organization, and they don't need to be an analytics expert at all. And you can even get Google to email the key stakeholders this report on a weekly basis. It's sitting on their inbox on Monday morning. So everyone who's involved gets the same information and can study the progress. A year ago, one of our team just told me about this amazing extension, which is my final piece of guidance on the subject. You can, if you're using Google Sheets, the online application, there's an analytics extension plugin for that, which goes directly into Google through an API, and you just choose the variables you want to track, and it gets them. And then it's in a spreadsheet. You can manipulate it any you want. You can track it over a long period of time. And it's changed our usage of analytics in terms of benchmarking individual client websites. So that would be my final recommendation in how to get started, I think.
Right. I've also often found that analytics can be very addicting. It's a matter of getting the gateway drug in the door and getting them hooked on it. So I think the email dashboards is a great feature to get some people hooked on looking at that data on a semi-consistent basis.
Yeah, and it's very easy, Kevin, as you know, is to get sucked into the massive amount of information, but it's information well, it's data for data's sake, and there's no commercial value necessarily unless you know what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So Marcia, obviously, there's organizations both large and small that use analytics. I'll point the same use case to you. You know, what resources does Google have available to help educate me or someone on my team to get that momentum going? How do I know how to build a dashboard, as an example?
Sure. So I think you're absolutely correct, Kevin. Google Analytics is designed to address the needs of a whole spectrum of users, from novice users to your most savvy digital analysts. So you know, as a product person, I focus primarily on building a better product and technology. But if I could stress to kind of a new user who's just starting to get started with analytics, it's really important from a business perspective to invest in both the people and the strategy up front. So to Roger's point, making sure you understand what the KPIs are for your business, and then developing an analytics plan and strategy around that. And then the technology comes second. So I think from a corporate culture perspective, it's very important to make sure that you have that type of investment in place. And then in terms of resources that Google provides, we launched Analytics Academy last year, which is a MOOC, which is a massive online open course. And there's 4 different courses available today, and that provides a lot of very rich information for users to get started. And again, we have information about kind of digital analytics principles, to a deep dive into Google Analytics in particular. And then we also have a course geared specifically towards e-commerce analytics. So that's a great resource for any organization to start to take advantage of.
Right. So the second use case, I'm sure many of you are experiencing yourself. And I'll direct this one to Roger. So mobile usage, as we all know, is increasing leaps and bounds every year. To the point that in my organization, mobile has become one of the most often used devices for my visitors. Specifically, when you look at how a multi-touch point environment affects user behavior and how they shop, how do you think of addressing the use case of when my customers shop using multiple platforms or devices? How do you connect those dots?
Yeah, so before I move on to the connecting part, I think just from my experience, when people talk about mobile, it's worth breaking that down, because on average, whilst Google mobile traffic might be more than half the total traffic to websites typically now, a good 30%, well, 30% of the total tends to be tablets across the board on average, and 20% would be small screen mobile devices, smartphones and so on. So, and I think tablet behavior is very different from mobile behavior, as I'm sure for obvious reasons. So it's worth understanding that first, rather than sort of bunching it all in the mobile thing. The first thing you should do, and the easiest thing to do, is to filter out the mobile traffic. And you'd probably be able to explain how that's done. So I definitely filter out mobile traffic as a constituency, and then observe how they're browsing your site, where they exit, where they come from, etc., navigation patterns. That's straightforward. However, the tricky thing is, you get the email on a Friday afternoon, you open it on your mobile device, you get home, you then do a more sort of considered browsing on your desktop and make a purchase. But it's important that the email gets some credit. So the most sophisticated way of doing that is to use something called user ID, where you can tag all the interactions based on the individual user. This is not sort of email address. It's not sort of customer sensitive data. In a Magento universe, the best way of doing that is to use the Magento customer ID and then store it against every analytic interaction. There's a challenge with this, though. I'm sorry, stop me if I'm taking up too much time. Is the one, and Google then provides some brilliant reports based on user ID, but it's only if you're a logged-in customer. And as you know, on a Magento store, maybe 15, 20, 25% of all visitors actually log in. You can encourage them to log in, which is the big challenge. But so you've got maybe 75, 80% of all your traffic, which is going around incognito. So there's another thing that we get clients to do, which where you put in some extra tagging on the traffic, and I think it's called a custom dimension or a custom variable, depending on which version you're using, and store the same user ID value in that, and then you can create some good segmented reports. So it's quite sophisticated, I think, this whole approach. And we have, to be honest, I'd say out of 50 active clients who are using Magento, maybe 2 are doing this.
Sure. So Roger raises some great points here. Just to add on to that, Google Analytics does provide user ID override capabilities in its latest version of Universal Analytics. And again, as Roger mentioned, that's the ability to set a user ID or customer ID across all of your different devices. So for example, your desktop site, your mobile devices, your mobile apps even, and then you're then able to understand that cross-device behavior. To Roger's point, that does require that the user does self-identify in some way, whether that's a logged-in experience or you place a cookie on site and have that particular user ID. I've had questions from a lot of different customers about how do you actually start to encourage users to self-identify. And this is really a problem that is not a technology problem, it's really a business problem. So how do you create value for end users so that they're incented to identify? Sort of the course, well, not necessarily course, but one way to do that is, of course, to offer promotions, offers, other sort of discounts potentially with the logged-in experience. Other things that I have seen are, for example, on mobile devices or even desktop devices, having kind of pre-filled forms so that the checkout process is easier. That's another way in which you're actually creating value for end users so that they choose to self-identify. And then another one that I've seen that I think is interesting is actually creating a customized experience for logged-in users. So I'm sure you've heard a lot at this conference around personalization, but how do you create a site experience, an app experience that actually seems more specific to the user so that, again, it feels like that's value that you're creating for those users. And that is really specific to every business.
Thanks. Well, if everyone keeps seeing the screen flicker back and forth, I swear I'm not touching the remote. Has a mind of its own, I guess. So I was at a conference last week, and IDC, who's a research group, talked about the customer journey, and that historically the customer journey was viewed as a very linear path, that I could attribute revenue based on where the person came from. And I think it's a somewhat related topic, because how we attribute revenue to different sources when there are multiple touch points at play these days is a very tricky and challenging waters to navigate. So I'm curious, Marcia, how do you recommend solving some of those challenges and taking a better look at how do I attribute revenue based on multiple channels?
So this is also a key theme that I see across a lot of retailers and different merchants. I am sure everyone has heard about attribution. I think by default. How many of you all are all familiar with attribution? Okay, great. So by default, I think everyone has always been doing last click, last non-direct click for some of us. And really that's just looking at that last touch point and giving all the credit to that, let's say, we call it our closers, whether it's email or paid search or whatever channel it is that's driving those conversions. But then what about all those other touch points that contributed to the conversion? So really that upper funnel activity. So whether it's display, social, or other channels, it's really important to be able to give credit to those different channels so that you're really understanding how these different media channels are interacting with to ultimately drive that conversion. So everyone understands attribution, why it's important, but it's hard to get started, right? So with Google Analytics, we actually do provide attribution modeling capabilities. So that's actually a different section of the tool. And in terms of how to actually start to grow an attribution practice within your organization, typically what I've seen is everyone does last click at first, and then we provide a set of out-of-the-box models. So first click, linear, which means you give equal credit to all touch points. You might have time decay, so that means the closer an interaction was to the purchase, the more credit you give to that particular channel. And so we see that users start to look at these out-of-the-box models and then start to see, okay, are there any patterns I can tease out? For example, display is contributing more than I expected, and it's a prime contributor to upper funnel activity. After that, I start to see users look at custom models. So let's say, for example, I want to specify specific rules or business logic to either give more credit or less credit to a channel. And then finally, what we also see with our most savvy users and our very sophisticated users is we also have data-driven capabilities. So that's kind of an algorithmic approach where we actually suggest an attribution model to you. So I know that's a lot of information, but in terms of how you can start to understand attribution, I would start with looking at some of the out-of-the-box models, then creating some rules to create custom models, and then when you're ready, start to take a look at a data-driven approach.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. So, Roger, my use case is I'm been selling within the U.S. boundary for the last 10 years, but I'm starting to grow geographically internationally. We all know it's a big growth opportunity in the e-commerce space in general. Typically consumers in different environments tend to react differently to the same experience. So how do you recommend, from an analytics standpoint, tracking the usage on a geographic basis so that I can understand how one set of users might differ from another? Or do you recommend putting them all together?
A mixture of the two, actually. The first thing to do is, obviously, if you're selling internationally and you're serious about it, you should set up separate Magento stores. If you then do that, you can then set up separate Google views or profiles, I think they're called, typically one per currency. So you would have in your Google master account, the US account, then you would have the German account, the UK account, the Scandinavian account, etc., each with their own currency. And that's quite straightforward to set up. There's a technical issue with that in that Google then will consolidate that into a base currency for reporting purposes, but it probably won't use the same exchange rates that you're using for financial reporting, so you get out of sync. So what we recommend to clients is they put in additional tracking and write out and use the exchange rate that you're using, and then create a separate consolidated view as well as the individual currency views. And really, it's as straightforward as that, and I don't think it's too problematic to implement, Kevin.
Great. Make it sound so easy. I'm sure as you hear a lot...
I should point out that the Magento as standard won't do the extra tracking where it consolidates into your reporting currency. You need a specialist to be able to put that into the website.
Exactly. Good plug.
I was thinking
for both of us, I'm saying. I'll pay you later. Obviously we all hear today and at other conferences you go to that, omni-channel commerce is the direction that everything is headed. And omni-channel presents unique challenges from an analytics standpoint. And Marcia talked briefly earlier about, and sort of Roger, about this universal ID concept and getting people to log in. So the use case I'll look at is I'm an omni-channel retailer, brick and mortar stores, I've got a catalog, I've got e-commerce, and I'm trying to get a universal view of my customer. Out of box is very difficult to do that natively, and obviously the anonymity of the web, I think, presents some unique challenges as well. So Marcia, I'll go back to you with a very similar question is, in this use case, how should I approach analytics and trying to get a complete picture of my customer?
Sure, I can actually give an example of a customer of ours who's really taking advantage of all the bells and whistles of Google Analytics. So they've gone ahead and implemented user ID override. So that captures kind of the ability to see cross-device. But what's a key missing piece is kind of the offline interaction. So the in-store sale if you have a brick and mortar network. And what they're actually doing is that they're sending these offline conversions using another capability called our open measurement protocol. And that's just a fancy way of saying that they're sending like hit data to Google Analytics that encompasses or captures these offline conversions. And what they did, in fact, this particular customer, they're a luxury department store. So they implemented user ID on their mobile apps and their desktop sites. And then when those users come to the store and transact, in Europe, I think it's fairly common, or in some places of Europe, it's common to actually give them your email address at the end of a transaction, and they'll email the receipt to the user as opposed to kind of printing a hard copy. And I think we see that being more common in the US as well. So they actually use that to tie up with their CRM system, and then they set the user ID from that so that they can tie together both the online behavior as well as that offline transaction. And then they were able to see some very interesting trends around, for example, 20% of users were online the same day that they actually came in store to transact. And then something like another 20% of those were actually on their mobile devices. And so in this way, you can get very valuable information about user patterns and behaviors so that they can start to make marketing decisions off of that and or site optimization so that, again, they're able to understand the full view of the customer.
Great. So we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask one last question, and I'll ask it to both of you, and you can both feel free to answer as you need. I think we talked about earlier how advanced people are in their usage of analytics, and I consider companies that are really advanced those that use the data gathered on a website to actually drive business decisions, things that apply to more than just the website. Product purchasing, merchandising, catalog printouts, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of applications for the data that you gather on the website. So do you have any specific examples that you've seen companies use analytics and how they use that data to actually help impact the business as a whole beyond just the website?
Broad subject. Not quite certain. I think one of again, if you think of our sort of target client, tend to be small to medium size, in dollar terms, less than $15 million. One of the things that gets clients, retailers really excited is seeing reports which include product data. So these are my products, how are they doing? So there's a nice little thing on one of the transactional reports where you can see the revenues, but you can then put what's called a pivot table in. And so here's the list of products sold, and a pivot table is a source of traffic, which is whether it's email, paid search, social, and so on, with the proportion of sales of specific products measured by source of traffic. The look of delight on client faces when they implement that and they've got this sort of product-centric view of their analytics is always something to behold. So that's my sort of starter for one on the subject. And I think the enhanced e-commerce and universal analytics is a better picture of product performance. So.
Yeah, there are actually a couple of different use cases that come to mind. So one, we've seen businesses start to bring in like margin or cost information associated with their products. So then they're not just looking at top line revenue numbers, they're able to get much more granular in terms of which ones are my most profitable products, so that you're not just kind of pushing the top line numbers, you're really looking at kind of that bottom line to understand, how can I actually increase profitability of my business. And so in that way, they're able to make different types of merchandising decisions, again, to start to encourage purchases of their most profitable products. Other ways that I've seen companies use Google Analytics data is that you can sort of think of this as upper funnel activity. So things like product detail views, like add to carts, those are very strong signals of intent on specific products. And then you can make different decisions both from like what to stock, what types of products to stock, and then also matching them up with different user segments so that you can get much more informed about what types of, like, for example, product selection, and of course, like optimizing your merchandising efforts both online and offline.
Yeah, so a lot of that merchandising, that knowledge you gain on the product performance can be applied to your catalog or your retail store or other channels that you might sell within.
And of course, marrying that with the user information. So you're not just looking at siloed product information, you're able to see that in the context of specific user demographics. So people from the US, people from the UK, male versus female, age groups, different interest groups. Then you can start to understand what sort of product user affinity there is. So I think that's great data for merchandisers.
I think I'd do that in conjunction with the content grouping as well.
Exactly.
Particularly in Magento's case, because it's very difficult to figure out whether the page that's being viewed in analytics is a product page or a product category page. So if you set up content groups for your categories, related products and so on, then some of the reporting becomes a lot more meaningful. If you just look down the pages viewed, you can't tell what they are.
And
it's just looking at URLs.
And that's actually one of the key advances that we've made with enhanced e-commerce is we've moved beyond that page-based model so that you can get very product-centric. So to your point, you can absolutely bring in product attributes like product category, brand, even like price ranges. There are different types of analysis that you can do at the product level so that, again, you're not kind of in this old world of just pages and screens.
Great. Well, I don't want to lie to you. I have time for one question. If you make it real fast, it might yank me off the stage. But one question. Go.
Thank you. You spoke a little bit about the offline measurement. Can you speak a little bit about the future, and will we ever get the same kind of clarity that we have with online stuff?
So I think that this is a key challenge that we're seeing in the industry as a whole. So how do we start to consolidate offline and online data? Obviously, I'm part of Google Analytics, so we would like to see that data being imported into Google Analytics. I think it's still, we'll see kind of where the industry moves in terms of, where that data gets consolidated. But we absolutely want to start with kind of offline transactions, but also bringing in CRM data into Google Analytics. You can actually do that today if you have that CRM ID, which is often used for user ID override. You can absolutely use our data import capabilities to what we say join on user attribute information. So for example, if I have an anonymous CRM ID and I have attributes about, let's say, member status, frequency of purchases, or other demographic information, you can import that into Google Analytics and then use that for segmentation. So then I can start to ask questions using kind of my business's vocabulary. So for example, frequency of purchases, both online and offline. Let's say I want to understand what types of online activity did my kind of like high spend users do. I can start to see that information within Google Analytics.
Great.
Can I add to that?
I'll stop us there because we're getting the old yank. But thank you very much, Marcia and Raja. Thank all of you for your participation.